We'll be getting it. We'll be looking for landmines, because you could have that. You know, it's been known to happen before to people. But we have not gotten it yet. It'll be sent to us at some point, and we'll take a very serious look at it.
President Trump saying just a short time ago in the Oval Office that he will determine whether to sign funding bill when he sees it. But he's clearly, obviously, not happy about only getting less than $1.5 billion for the wall. And, well, he says he has lots of options to find more funding. And that includes, according to Fox sources, declaring a national emergency as soon as next week. Joining me now, Republican Congressman Chip Roy of Texas. Congressman, obviously, everyone's on pins and needles. Leadership in your party urging President Trump to sign this compromise deal. But it's a long way off from what he was looking for and what ultimately he says we need to secure our southern border. What are your thoughts?
Well, Charles, thanks for having me on. As you know, I represent the 21st District of Texas. I've spent a lot of time down on our southern border watching streams of people coming across our border, enriching the cartels when they have operational control of our border. I do not think that the president ought to sign this deal. I don't think it's a deal of any kind, and I don't think he should be urged to do so. I think we should do a 2-week CR. I think we should force people back to the table, and I think we should demand that we get the level of spending that's necessary for the border, for the wall, for the fencing, but also for the beds. The Democrats seem hell-bent on making sure we don't have the beds and the judges to prosecute and deal with the significant asylum claims that are coming across our border. So I think we ought to get back to the well and go back to work. And I think the president should reject this bad deal.
There's no doubt he's grappling with that decision right now. And to your point, and all your points are obviously valid points, by the same token, the general consensus is coming out of Washington that your brethren, your GOP, fellow GOPers on the Senate side, were in the last shutdown ready to blink. And that at this particular point, remember Senator McConnell kept saying he will not submit any legislation to President Trump on this issue unless he thought he would sign it. Right. So obviously he must believe President Trump is going to sign it. And if not, a lot of people are handicapping sort of a revolt amongst Republicans in the Senate.
Well, I think the president is itching to get somewhere to get the work done that the people elected him to do. I understand why he'd be looking at it that way, but I think he ought to reject the deal, and here's why. We're winning. We're winning the argument because the American people understand that our sovereignty is at stake, that the security of American citizens is at stake, but importantly, the security and well-being of the migrants that seek to come here is at stake. They're being abused on the path. Women and girls are being sold into the sex trade. We had a stash house in Houston with 54 people found where they have to pay ransom to cartels. That's insane. The president knows it. The American people know it. Unfortunately, as usual, Congress gets it wrong, and they're not going to do their job to send something up to the president. But I think we ought to stay here and fight and do it. And it's the same thing on spending. You know, the GOP, they'll talk out of one side of their mouth. They'll go home, they'll try to pass a balanced budget amendment and go home and campaign on it.
Let me get to that in a second, but let's wrap this up with the national. If indeed President Trump signs this, would you be in favor of him also declaring a national emergency as well and finding other ways to find funding?
Look, I think the president is absolutely right to focus on the emergency at our border and to suggest and declare that there is an emergency. But I think we ought to focus really on the 284 options where he can use the code that exists to use fencing to stop drug interdiction and to improve our ability to stop the flow of drugs across our border. And I think he ought to follow the law. And Congress has passed statutes that allows the president to declare emergencies. And so long as he stays within the four corners of the law that the Congress passed, then I think he should do what he deems necessary to secure the country.
Forgive me for not having confetti and balloons, but we hit another milestone. We topped $22 trillion in our debt for the first time. The ticking debt bomb is really off the chain right now. And, you know, just recently, Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney said that no one really cares about deficits. And, you know, of course, this was a major issue for Republicans, particularly when President Obama was in office. I mean, shouldn't we care about this right now? Shouldn't we find a way to curb this spending?
Well, you know better than most what runaway deficits, runaway debt means to the future stability of our country. I think General Mattis was right when he called it the greatest national security threat to our country. $22 trillion and counting. We're gonna be at $30 trillion in another decade. We're gonna have more interest that we're gonna have to pay on the debt than we're even gonna pay on defense or Social Security. That needs to stop now, and it starts with Republicans not hiding behind mandatory spending, that is Medicare and Social Security, but focusing on non-defense discretionary discretionary and even defense discretionary to make sure we do our job to balance the budget. And I had a great meeting with my friend Thomas Massey from Kentucky, a great acolyte, Mike Sullivan, who works for Senator Phil Gramm, who's done more for fiscal sanity in this country than anybody I know. We had a meeting just 2 hours ago figuring out a plan on what we're going to do. We're going to fight. I'm on the House Budget Committee, and I'm going to make sure it's clear to the American people that we're going to stand up to try to balance the budget, and we're not going to let Republicans hide like they often do by balancing the budget in year 10. It's time to get serious about it.
It's music to my ears. Maybe, maybe term limits might help, because then people won't be trying to, buy their way into re-election, and maybe we really could get some authentic leadership down there. Real quick before I let you go, Republican Senator Marco Rubio adding his voice to Democrats calling for laws to be changed that surround stock buybacks. You're very familiar with the financial industry. What's your take on that? Are they having a negative impact on the economy somehow?
Well, look, I'd like to look at that issue a little bit more before I make a final judgment on it. I do think that corporations ought to be careful about what they're doing to manipulate markets. But the flip side is companies have the ability and the right in a free market to be able to figure out what they want to be able to buy back and have, what they want to be out in the public circulating around. And I'd be awfully careful about interjecting Congress into that. We want to get economic growth, put more money in the hands of the American people like we did in the tax bill 2 years ago. Let's fix the spending here so that we have fiscal sanity. Let's get our hands around and make it a more predictable environment so the American people will invest. Let's get health care costs down and get this economy at 3% and growing, and we'll be fine.
All right, Congressman Roy, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Charles.